Before I get into that, I must say we don't sponsor people on this program just because they agree with me. I'm confident I can handle myself in any exchange. That said, I should acknowledge that the segment I did last Thursday on anti-vaxxers, because of the documentary that will be shown here tomorrow night in place of my show at 8 o'clock, the interview provoked lethal comments. And I have to say a stack of them. And this is why I've been saying that we must sensibly address those who have concerns about vaccination. Last night, as you just heard in Andrew's show, at the presentation of the trophy to Novak Djokovic, the president of Tennis Australia, Jane Hardlicker, was loudly booed when she talked about the world entering a new phase of positivity because of vaccination. Let me say at the outset, I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I roll up my sleeves each year for the flu injection, and I'll be rolling them up for this one. But you can't ignore the powerful sentiments of people who are suspicious of the propaganda in relation to these vaccines. Government have turned a blind eye to contrary opinion. They have, in fact, tried to silence those who express such opinions. People have been banned from social media for arguing well-researched views on vaccination. I've read a stack of that material. The text line was on fire following the interview with Jane Hansen last Thursday night. People wanting more debate and angry that reservations about the vaccines are being dismissed as simply anti-vaxxers. I'm saying that the government is at risk of undermining the whole vaccination program by conducting a one-sided government edict saying everyone must roll up their sleeve and get the jab, or no travel unless you've had the vaccine, or you're not welcome in your place of work unless you've had the jab. I've said all along, and others have said, the only way through all of this is via debate. We've had none. And when you seek to shut down an opposing view, it only raises suspicions. Many of you were critical of me because I didn't challenge my guest enough. And on reflection, that criticism is valid. Many of you identified that my guest was adamant about me taking the jab, and you said simply it was none of her business. Such was the heat generated by the debate, I feel I should share with you some of these views. John from New South Wales said, Alan, I love your show. Could you please make clear that the anti-vaxxers are not anti-vaccination, but pro-choice? As Pauline Hanson describes herself, I've met them. You yourself have declared many times that government should trust us to look after our own health. Anna from Tamworth said, it'd be pertinent to include in the discussion on vaccines the facts around aborted fetuses being used in the manufacture of vaccines. Is this moral? I must say that is the concern expressed by the Catholic Archbishop of Sydney. Another viewer said, there are doctors and health professionals refusing this too. Everyone's got a choice. Stop with the naming and shaming. Peter said, I'm surprised by Alan's questioning. Anyone can refuse any vaccine if they wish. Another viewer said, it's not anti-vaxxer. Stop talking rubbish. People are just anti-unproven vaccination being forced. Joel said she was insinuating Facebook should censor vaccination misinformation. Shame on you, Alan, for not challenging her on that subject. Anthony said, we're not anti-vaxxers, we're pro-choice. Jim writes, I'm not an anti-vaxxer, I just don't want this one, thanks. Another viewer said, come on, Alan, there's a vast difference between an anti-vaxxer and a regular person who questions the validity and safety of a rushed vaccine for a spurious illness that we're being coerced into getting if we want to maintain our God-given freedoms. Pat wrote, if the virus keeps changing, why would you take it? There are a stack of these. I could go on forever. Many of you made reference to Jonas Salk, the American virologist and medical researcher who developed one of the first successful polio vaccines. He died in 1995. But he was awarded the grant to study the polio virus in 1948. It was only in 1955 that he announced the vaccine was effective and safe, and a nationwide inoculation campaign began. Now, of course, times have changed, but viewers have expressed concern about the speed with which this is being introduced. And even then, in Salk's day, there were defective vaccines, not his, which generated significant adverse events. I'm simply saying these matters ought to be addressed. Today, the vaccines are being touted as to be the be-all and end-all for business, investment and jobs. I should point out there are only 39 cases of coronavirus in Australia, 25 in Victoria, 9 in hospital. But when I mentioned almost a year ago the ultimate vaccine may be herd immunity, all hell broke loose. I note today that coronavirus cases in America have fallen by 77% over the past 6 weeks. You don't need to be a cynic to suggest that no medication would slash cases by that figure. Experts are saying that natural immunity from prior infection may be more common than what is measured by testing. Now, Professor Marty Makary is an American surgeon, a New York Times best-selling author, and a Johns Hopkins health policy expert. He argues today that vaccines don't explain the steep decline in coronavirus cases over the past 6 weeks because vaccination rates were then low and they take weeks to kick in. He is predicting, actually, that COVID-19 will be mostly gone by April and that 55% of Americans would by now have natural immunity from prior infection, that is, herd immunity. Now, remember, I've said all along, 99% of all cases were mild. So even though someone wasn't tested, and of course millions haven't been, they had it and were what is called asymptomatic, and that triggers natural immunity. Professor Makary acknowledges that people are now getting vaccinated and that 15% of Americans so far have received the vaccine. But he makes the very valid point, and I quote, "Many experts, politicians and journalists are afraid to talk about herd immunity." But he said, quote, "Herd immunity is the inevitable result of viral spread and vaccination," unquote. And he said that herd immunity had been well documented in the Brazilian city of Manaus, where researchers in the Lancet reported the prevalence of prior COVID-19 to be 76%, resulting in a significant slowing of the infection. Now, Professor Makary from the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine and the Bloomberg School of Public Health is not saying don't get vaccinated, but he is saying the dramatic decrease in the number of cases in America and here may owe a great deal to herd immunity. People had the virus, but there were no symptoms. We knew from the outset that the elderly and those with comorbidities were at risk. That's why I argued from the outset it should have been possible to deal with that cohort and let others get on with their lives. Now, it may not please the alarmists, but what the eminent professor is saying is that herd immunity plus vaccination may well see COVID-19 on its way. And that's what governments who've thrived on alarmism should now be saying. Bring the national patient out of its economic and psychological coma. And to all my viewers from last Thursday night who were very critical, your texts were welcome, and generally the criticisms were valid. It's a pity government doesn't listen to legitimate criticism, but rather wants to silence it. However, they don't want to listen to criticism about climate change either. Or as one of my viewers wrote, and certainly not megalomaniacal control freak state premiers' know-all attitude to opinions that conflict with theirs. George Orwell, the English novelist, essayist and critic, died 50 years ago. So much of what he warned has come to pass. He once wrote, and it sadly applies today, in a world of universal deceit, telling the truth becomes a criminal act. What do you think? I like it that you're not afraid to disagree. Email me, alan@skynews.com.au, and the text line 0414 000 848, and tell your friends they can listen to the program on the iHeart Radio app. It's Monday, February 22.